So whether you're looking at it from an American point of view, a globalization point of view, or demographic point of view, this was always going to be the last decade. The system we have was established by the Americans at the end of World War II. We didn't have a free trade system before that. So if you weren't an empire, you were you're typically a colony. With World War II, that system ended, and the Americans patrolled the ocean so that anyone could participate in any supply chain and access any market and resource and work with any partner. And for the first time, we got true civilian shipping, and that has generated the world that we know. That's international oil trade, that's international manufacturers, that's the European Union, that's the rise of China. All of that came from the American policy during the Cold War. The whole idea was we will allow this to happen and we will protect you if in exchange you side with us against the Soviets. Well, Cold War ended in 92, and we've been edging ever further away from that system. And in 7 straight presidential elections, the person who didn't like globalization is the one who won. That includes Biden. So we are well past the point of no return there. And now we get to see the system break back apart. And that'll be messy by any definition. While that was going on, it also changed the way we live. And not just because things were getting better and safer, but the technologies of industrialization now could be applied everywhere in the world, including to the former colonies. And so from 1945 until 1992, that was primarily the Western world and their affiliates. But after 1992, it expanded to the entirety of the world. So the Chinese joined when Nixon went to China, even up to the Russians joining in 1995. When you industrialize, you also urbanize. And when you urbanize, you have fewer kids. And after 2.5 generations of that, most of the advanced world, including places in the advanced developing world like Korea and China, have now aged well past the point of no return. And for all of those countries, this century may well be their last because they don't have populations at replacement levels anymore. Now, it's happening at different speeds in different places, and every country started at a different time and followed their own cultural norms, their own economic development policies. So there's a lot of staggering in here, but this decade was always the decade when we were going to hit past the tipping point, because this is the decade when all the younger countries they age past the point of reconstitution, and all the older countries age into mass retirement. So whether you're looking at it from an American point of view, a globalization point of view, or a demographic point of view, this was always going to be the last decade. COVID sped it up by 2 years, and the Ukraine war is a hard stop. We're never going back to 2019. The Europeans have been at peace because of the globalized system for 75 years. And because the peace was imposed from the outside, and because the country that imposed that peace, the United States, smashed the Germans as part of the process, we have taken the center weight out of the European system and replaced it with a degree of placidity and wealth that they could have never generated on their own. I am hopeful that the Ukraine war is going to be a new page for the Europeans where they both acknowledge their history and build something better. And, maybe we have seen some things pushing in that direction in the last few weeks. But on the other side, the geography hasn't changed at all. The conflict with the Russians isn't something that's new. It has been part of European warfare, politics, and security going back to the beginning of the concept of Europe. And to think that the Germans can go from a pacifist socialist background to just flip and double the defense spending and be asked to defend Poland from the Russians again, and there's not going to be any side effects from that, I really hope it works. But we're going to have a situation here very soon where all the patterns are going to repeat. There are a couple of pipelines that come to Germany that don't go through Ukraine and don't go through Poland. So we're going to have a situation here very soon where the Russians are going to tell the Germans, hey, yeah, we can totally keep your lights on and keep supplying you with energy, but there's going to be a cost. You have to back out of the NATO coalition when it comes to all issues Ukrainian, in which case the NATO position would cease to exist because we can't do it without German logistics. So all of these historical fault lines are still there. And I dare say the Russians are more aware of them these days than most of the Europeans. In a world where everyone in the American alliance defers to the United States on security issues and so does not float a hostile navy, and where your primary foes are Russia and China and they're functionally landlocked, this works. But when globalization goes away and each country has to start looking out for their own interests economically, and especially in the maritime realm, you will have multiple navies that are competing. And while the United States will, by and large, still have the most powerful navy by at least a factor of 5 moving forward, it's about a factor of 10 right now, we no longer can operate with complete impunity. And in that environment, we cannot protect the sea lanes for everyone. We can only protect the sea lanes for certain countries that, for whatever reason, have bought into our program, whatever that happens to be, administration by administration. We're not there yet, but we're getting there. Because in a world where the Russian energy supplies are disrupted, or in a world where the Chinese and the Japanese are at each other's throats, or in a world where Persian Gulf energy supplies break down, we will need regional powers will be forced to look after their own interests, and they cannot do that without a functional navy. There's no reason to expect the United States to enter into a significant war with any of them. In fact, a lot of them that will be arising are likely to be friendly rather than not. But the days when the United States can just by fiat dictate a security environment on the waves, those are gone. And we're in the transition now to whatever's next. I think we're going to see more of that rather than less. While Ukraine suggests that maybe the United States is to a degree getting interested in the world again, we'll see how long it lasts. But for all the other conflicts that are going on in the world right now, I think they've just completely fallen off the radar. I mean, when was the last time you heard about Congo or Sudan or Yemen or even Iraq? None of these conflicts have stopped. It's just the Americans have stopped caring. If you want to be involved, if the U.S. government wants America to be involved, there is a case, you have to make the case to the American people about why it's worth intervention after 20 years of the forever wars. That's a hard call. And even with Ukraine, Biden has gone well out of his way to make it very clear that this is not going to be a regular conflict. There are risks. Absolutely. Anything with the Russians is going to be risky. But we're not talking about forward surging forces to face the Russians down in eastern Ukraine. And that's not going to be on the agenda at all. So either you are a country that is able to negotiate a side deal with the United States, or you are on your own. And countries are still coming to terms with what that means. The country that by far is looking at the worst position are the Chinese, because the security situation in Ukraine has laid bare their 40 years of their planning as being wrong. And they're losing the ability to talk to the United States in a constructive way due to internal problems, and that the Americans are walking away too. And there's no country in the world that is more dependent upon the old system than the Chinese. So there is this belief in China that the Russians will take Ukraine first. It'll kind of prove the theory that we have that we can take Taiwan easily. Clearly, that's not the case, because while the Russians are clearly not performing to snuff, the Ukrainian army is not a regular army. They're doing great, don't get me wrong. But the power mismatch in that is not nearly as big as the power mismatch between China and Taiwan, because the Taiwanese have been preparing for this war now for 70 years, and they have a lot of modern equipment, and oh yeah, they're still an island. So scratch one, they know the strategic relationship will not go the way they were hoping. They're terrified of the boycotts and the sanctions, because the idea that shareholders would back away is something that they can't deal with economically. They need those connections in order to employ their own population. And the sanctions, say what you will about the Russian economy. It's a major exporter of both foodstuffs and energy. And the Chinese are major importers of both. So if we put a Russia-style sanction on the Chinese system, that's it. It's over. It collapses in less than a year.